Okay, today we invite you to pause just for a while. Not to escape the world, but to re-enter it with new eyes. To breathe not as a reflex, but as an act of presence. Imagine, for a moment, a quiet flame flickering in a still room. The world outside may swirl in urgency notifications, obligations, decisions piling atop one another, but in this one moment, everything narrows to a gentle light, a simple awareness that you are here. That awareness, fragile, profound, and often fleeting, is the doorway to what many ancient traditions call liberation. In the East, this is known as Moksha, a release from the cycle of craving, suffering, and rebirth, not necessarily in the metaphysical sense, but in the daily sense of becoming free from the loops we live inside without realizing. Today, we explore this freedom not through rituals or renunciation, but through clarity, through choice, and surprisingly, through Stoicism. You might know the Stoics as stern philosophers who taught endurance, self-restraint, and emotional resilience. But under the surface, Stoicism offers something deeper than endurance. It offers presence. A steady, grounded attention to what we can control, and a graceful surrender to what we cannot. The Stoic Path is not just about fortitude, it is about inner stillness. So what happens when we place this path side by side with Moksha, a concept born in the forests of ancient India, refined in the Upanishads, and illuminated in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions? Despite the cultural distance, these paths converge at a profound point. Freedom begins not in conquering the world, but in no longer being conquered by it. Through this video, we'll travel between everyday life and ancient wisdom. We'll see how even the most mundane routines, making coffee, commuting to work, answering emails, can become spiritual practices when seen through a clearer lens. We'll draw from history and philosophy, but also from forgotten rituals, curious archaeological finds, and unexplained parallels between East and West. And in doing so, we won't ask, "What do you want from life?" but rather, "What are you willing to be free from?" Because living consciously is not about constant awareness. It is about consistent intention. It is not about always being calm. It is about knowing how to return to calm. This is not a journey of achievement. It is a journey of remembering, of aligning, of releasing. So let us begin not with ambition, but with attention. Not with urgency, but with understanding. Let this be a soft beginning, a quiet rebellion. A moment where the flame steadies, and so do you wake up. The soft gray of morning presses gently against the curtain. Somewhere outside, the world has already begun. Cars hum, notifications ping, the smell of breakfast drifts faintly from another apartment. You reach for your phone, almost automatically. Within seconds, your mind is pulled into the tied-in email from work, a headline, a half-forgotten obligation. None of it hostile, yet all of it demanding. But pause. In this very moment, what if you asked yourself not what must be done, but whether this moment was chosen? Not what's next, but whether the present was entered consciously? This is the beginning of awareness and also, paradoxically, of freedom. Not freedom in the political sense, not even in the philosophical sense of agency, but a subtler, quieter freedom, the one that lives in the gap between impulse and response. The Stoics knew this space well. To them, freedom was not an escape from responsibility, but an alignment with nature, your nature. To live according to reason, not instinct. To act rather than react. This sounds simple. But in a world that profits from your distraction, it is one of the most radical acts available. You do not need to become a monk to experience it. You do not need to renounce the world. On the contrary, you need to enter it more deeply, more consciously, with your eyes open. Imagine preparing your coffee in the morning not as a task, but as a meditation. The warmth of the cup, the scent of roasted beans, the rising steam, each detail becomes a thread that anchors you to the present. Noticing is the first practice. From there, living begins. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, began his days with writing, not proclamations or laws, but meditations. In private, he wrote of control and surrender, of integrity and fate. He reminded himself that most things lie beyond his power and that this is not a tragedy, but a gift. Because what remains is where all strength is built, his mind, his choices, his values. Even surrounded by politics, betrayal, and illness, he returned again and again to one truth. If I master my responses, I cannot be mastered. In the East, a different language arose to express this same insight. The sages of India spoke of moksha liberation not from the world, but from the mistaken belief that we are the world. Liberation from identification with roles, emotions, fears, and desires. It is not indifference, it is clarity. The Gita, the Upanishads, and countless other teachings describe this not as something to be achieved, but as something to be uncovered. The soul is already free. It is the self that forgets. The Stoic calls this forgetting passion pathos, the clouding of judgment by fear, desire, or grief. The yogi calls it maya illusion. Both paths agree. It is not the external event, but the internal distortion that binds us. Therefore, the practice is not withdrawal, but refinement. Not abandoning the world, but seeing it as it truly is, temporary, unpredictable, and ultimately not yours to control. In the rush of ordinary life, we lose this vision. But if we choose, even the mundane becomes sacred. Washing dishes becomes a form of service. Answering emails becomes an exercise in patience. Walking to the bus stop becomes an opportunity to observe the breath. This is not romanticism, it is realism of a deeper kind. For the mind left untrained becomes a servant to chaos, but the mind brought to stillness becomes an instrument of peace. The Stoics taught a discipline called prohairesis, the inner faculty of choice. Epictetus, who was born a slave, said that though he owned nothing, no man could rob him of his freedom. Because freedom, as he defined it, was the ability to determine one's own response. He walked with chains, but not with anger. He labored under masters, but not under fear. His world was not free, but he was. The path to this clarity does not require drama. It does not come through great revelations. It comes instead in thousands of small recognitions. The moment you feel impatience arise, and you breathe instead of reacting. The moment you notice envy and smile at its powerlessness. The moment you are insulted and understand that you are not the target, only the witness. These are the trainings of freedom. They are not glamorous, but they are sacred. The Indian mystics spoke of pratyahara, a practice of sensory withdrawal, not to shut out the world, but to stop being controlled by it. In a similar way, the Stoic practices are not about emotional repression, but about emotional clarity. To feel anger but not obey it. To feel sorrow but not drown in it. To feel joy but not chase it. In all things to remain centered. Imagine now a typical workday. Deadlines, noise, interruptions, but you enter it not as a machine, but as a monk in disguise. You prioritize not from urgency, but from value. You decline what does not serve your deeper intention. You say yes, not out of guilt, but out of purpose. Each hour becomes a mirror. And in the mirror you ask, is this how a free person moves? No one else may notice. That is fine. This is not performance. This is purification. The Stoics warned against external validation, knowing how easily we become puppets to approval. And the sages of Moksha warned against spiritual pride, knowing how ego can wear robes of humility. True presence is invisible, but it transforms everything. There is no need to change your job, your city, or your routine to begin this path. The only requirement is attention, not constant mindfulness, but frequent returning. You will forget. That is part of the process. But you will remember too, and each return is a victory. Each conscious breath is a crack in the illusion. Over time, something shifts. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You no longer take offense so easily. You begin to value silence. You begin to crave stillness. Not as an escape, but as home. You start to act, not from pressure, but from principle. This is not a new identity. It is the shedding of old ones, and slowly the world loses its power over you. Not because it changes, but because you see it more clearly. The Stoics called this apatheia, state of inner equilibrium. The sages called it atma, jnana, knowledge of the self. In either case, what emerges is the same: peace without passivity, strength without struggle, presence without performance. You are still in the world. You still cook, work, drive, text, shop, but the world no longer defines your inner weather. You are not a passenger, you are the witness. And from that quiet center, life begins to move differently. Not more slowly, but more precisely, not more easily, but more meaningfully. This is the gift of conscious living. Not that life becomes simpler, but that you do. The idea of liberation has always lived on the edge of the known world. It finds home not in temples or palaces, but in places where silence grows deep: forests, war-torn cities, prison walls. Across time, men and women have sought freedom not by escaping the world, but by standing still within it. Some wore crowns, others chains. But all ask the same question: how can I live untouched by what does not belong to me? In the dense philosophical forests of ancient India around the 8th century BCE, sages gathered not to worship, but to inquire. They sat beneath trees, beside rivers, in caves carved by wind and time. Their scriptures, the Upanishads, spoke not of gods with demands, but of self with depth. In these teachings, moksha is not a prize earned after death, but a shift in perception while alive. It is the quiet realization: I am not the body. I am not even the mind. I am the witness behind both. This awakening, they taught, ends the cycle of rebirth not because one escapes life, but because one ceases to cling to it. Far from India, in a colder land ruled by swords and politics, a Roman emperor was writing in his tent. His army surrounded by Germanic tribes, his nights filled with strategy and sorrow, Marcus Aurelius did not pray for conquest. He wrote about peace. Not peace on the battlefield, but peace within the self. His meditations were not written for fame. They were never meant to be read. They were a mirror, a place where he reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. This, too, was a form of moksha. The contrasts are striking: one man in rags, another in robes of state, but their longing is the same. To be free of the noise, to live by principle, to stand still in the flood. Marcus ruled Rome, but sought the throne of the self. And like the sages before him, he found that the path was inward, not outward. Long before Marcus, another voice rose, one that echoed through narrow alleys and public squares. Socrates, poor in coin but rich in clarity, refused to call himself a teacher. He claimed to know nothing. Yet in his questions, empires of illusion collapsed. He did not offer answers but tools. And one of those tools was the relentless pursuit of what truly matters. The unexamined life, he warned, is not worth living. He faced death not with fear, but with a calm unavailable to those still clinging to life. His trial was not just a historical event. It was a demonstration of what happens when freedom from fear meets power without wisdom. Centuries later, another figure would emerge, less known, but equally luminous. Epictetus, born a slave in the Roman Empire, walked with a limp and taught with fire. He owned nothing. Yet he taught emperors. His message was precise: freedom has nothing to do with circumstance. No man is free, he said, who is not master of himself. He urged his students not to chase ambition, but to observe desire, not to avoid suffering, but to train perception. This training, like the yoga of the East, was not about belief, it was about clarity and motion. In 2007, archaeologists excavating a Greco-Roman site in Egypt uncovered a startling object, a papyrus fragment containing Greek lines that closely resembled a verse from the Isa Upanishad, a text over 2,000 years old from India. The resemblance was more than stylistic. It hinted at shared metaphysics, that the self is not the doer, but the observer. Not the seeker, but the sought. Scholars debated its authenticity. Yet the possibility ignited a new question. Had the ancient Mediterranean thinkers encountered Indian wisdom earlier than we thought? Or had humanity, across distance and language, simply arrived at the same truth? This discovery was not just a curiosity, it was a symbol. It whispered that beneath culture, belief, and geography, human beings have always intuited the same hunger. Not for possessions, not even for happiness, but for clarity, for inner coherence, for the feeling that life, no matter how complex, can be lived from a place of stillness. In Buddhist texts, the Buddha's enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree is often seen as a singular moment, but it was not a miracle. It was the slow unraveling of delusion. A prince turned monk, seated beneath fig leaves, watching his breath, his thoughts, his fears. He saw not heaven, but his own mind. And by seeing it clearly, he was no longer trapped by it. This again is moksha. Not as magic, but as understanding. In the same spirit, Seneca, Rome's most articulate Stoic, wrote letters to his student Lucilius from exile. Stripped of his titles, accused of conspiracy, surrounded by political paranoia, he still wrote of virtue, of time, of calm. "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality," he observed. And from this, he taught that the greatest prison is not made of stone, but of unexamined thought. Across cultures, the theme repeats. Adversity becomes the training ground for liberation. The outer world remains unstable, but the inner world can become clear, deliberate, anchored. Whether on a throne or under arrest, these individuals turned inward, and from within, discovered something that circumstance could never threaten. It is tempting to mythologize them, to place them beyond reach, but that would miss the point. Their wisdom was not found in exceptionalism but in attention. Not in their greatness, but in their willingness to pause, to question, to choose again and again the hard path of clarity over the easy path of reaction. And perhaps most striking of all is how these teachings remain relevant, utterly so. In a world of information excess, political noise, and identity fatigue, their words cut through like a quiet bell. When Marcus says, "You could leave life right now," let that determine what you do and say and think. He's not being morbid. He's inviting presence. When the sages say, "Tatamasi," you are that they are not offering comfort. They are offering responsibility. You are not a wave. You are the ocean forgetting itself. Their lives, separated by continents and centuries, all point to the same threshold. There is the life lived in reaction and the life lived in awareness. There is bondage to desire and there is freedom in discipline. There is noise and there is the sound of one's own breath, steady beneath it all. The path to Moksha, the Stoic Path, the Examined Path, they are not separate roads. They are different doorways into the same room. A room with no furniture, no mirrors, no decorations. Only a chair, a light, and you, sitting, breathing, choosing. Culture is memory in motion. It is not merely what a people do, but how they remember who they are. Within its symbols, rites, and silences, something deeper is stored, something not always visible, but always present. And among these cultural expressions, the idea of inner liberation, of moksha, of stoic detachment, of spiritual sovereignty has found refuge not only in texts and philosophies, but in gestures, colors, statues, and rituals. It survives not just as thought, but as rhythm. In India, the image of Shiva sitting cross-legged in meditation is both familiar and mysterious. His eyes are half closed, the river Ganges flows from his matted hair, and serpents coil loosely around his neck. He is both serene and dangerous, both creator and destroyer. He does not flee the world, he sits in the center of it, unmoved. His silence is not the absence of noise. It is the stillness that absorbs it. Shiva, often seen as the ultimate yogi, represents the paradox of moksha, that liberation does not come after chaos ends, but within it. He does not wait for peace. He embodies it. On the other side of history, in the Mediterranean world, marble statues of Stoic thinkers stood in public spaces. But these were not decorations, they were reminders. Memento mori, remember that you will die, was not a morbid phrase, but a call to wakefulness. In some Greek cities, skulls were placed in banquet halls, not to provoke fear, but to urge gratitude. Death, to the ancients, was not a threat. It was the great clarifier. It dissolved illusion. It made every cup of wine sacred, every conversation urgent, every sunset final and therefore full. This interplay of philosophy and culture is not accidental, it is deliberate. For humans, abstract truths rarely survive without form. And so we build them into art, into customs, into clothing and gesture and silence. Consider the practice of sannyasa in Hindu tradition, the stage of life where one renounces possessions, roles, and social identity to live as one already free. The sannyasin wears simple robes, owns little, speaks less. Not because this guarantees enlightenment, but because it removes distraction, it clears space. And in that space, awareness can grow. Curiously, a similar custom appears in ancient Pythagorean schools. There, novices were asked to remain silent for up to 5 years. They did not debate. They did not write. They listened. The silence was not punitive. It was purifying. Only once the mind had been emptied of noise could it begin to discern truth. This mirrored the Stoic commitment to speech as an ethical act, not merely an expression, but a choice. Let your words be few and well chosen, Epictetus advised. Not for austerity's sake, but to preserve the power of language. In monasteries, both Eastern and Western, bells still ring not to mark time, but to interrupt it. A bell is not a command. It is a reminder. A small rupture in the routine that says, return. In Zen temples, the sound of a gong invites the monk back to breath. In Christian abbeys, the tolling bell calls the body to stillness and the soul to recollection. Even in secular spaces, rituals persist, lighting candles, pouring tea, touching a photograph. These are not meaningless habits. They are acts of alignment. But perhaps the most mysterious parallel lies not in rituals alone, but in historical echoes. Across continents, similar expressions of spiritual detachment arise with uncanny resemblance. The Stoics trained to face poverty, exile, loss, and pain without collapse. The yogis trained to sit in caves, unmoved by cold or hunger, content in breath alone. In both, the goal was the same: to remain sovereign in the face of fate, to meet life without trembling, to meet death without complaint. Why do such similar practices appear in places so far apart? Is it coincidence? Or is there something in the human condition that, across time and geography, calls us toward the same forms of release? Historians have puzzled over this. Linguists trace words. Anthropologists compare customs, but no consensus has been reached. The origin remains unclear. Yet perhaps the answer does not lie in where the ideas came from, but in why they arise at all. Humans suffer. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We suffer because we crave permanence in an impermanent world. We suffer because we identify with what is passing. And across cultures, the solution is the same. Learn to see clearly. Learn to let go. Learn to stand in the center of motion and remain still. One particularly evocative example comes from Japan, the tea ceremony, or shanoyu. At first glance, it appears simple. Water is boiled, tea is prepared. Guests sit quietly. But every movement is precise, every silence intentional. The ceremony is not about the tea, it is about attention. It is about grace under simplicity. The host bows, pours, offers not out of duty, but from presence. It is, in essence, a training in Stoic virtue, wearing the kimono of Japanese aesthetics. Beauty here is not in ornament, but in awareness. In Egypt, tomb paintings often depicted the deceased sitting before a scale. On one side, a feather, on the other, the heart. If the heart was heavier, the soul could not proceed. This metaphor is not so different from the Stoic idea of ataraxia, the lightness of being that comes from having no guilt. No regret, no attachment to what does not belong to us. A light heart is not naive, it is empty of illusion. In Tibetan Buddhism, monks spend weeks creating intricate sand mandalas only to sweep them away when finished. The ritual is not tragic. It is liberating. It says, beauty is temporary, and because of that, it is sacred. We create not to possess, but to express. We live not to control, but to witness. All these rituals, across geography and belief, point to the same horizon, inner freedom expressed in outer form, not as spectacle, but as remembrance. Each chant, each statue, each brushstroke or silence is a doorway. Through it, we do not escape the world. We re-enter it with cleaner eyes. The Stoics might not have lit incense or built mandalas, but they practiced in their own way. Daily journaling, nightly reflection, the use of premeditatio malorum, the visualization of worst-case outcomes, not to provoke anxiety, but to build resilience. These were their rituals. They did not kneel, but they bowed inward. What unites all these traditions is not uniformity, but depth. Whether seated on the banks of the Ganges or at a marble desk in Rome, the truly free were never loud. Their lives were quiet, intentional, rooted, and from that quietness, they changed the world not by force but by example. Today we are not so different. We scroll, we swipe. We consume information faster than we can digest it. But even now, a ritual can save us. Lighting a candle at dawn, writing a single sentence in a notebook, drinking tea without distraction, turning off the phone for 1 hour. These small acts, done with presence, are no less powerful than any ancient rite. They are how modern life remembers the sacred. And perhaps that is all Moksha ever asked of us, not to leave the world, but to return to it with cleaner hands. Not to renounce life, but to recognize it as ceremony. And perhaps that is all Stoicism ever taught, not to harden the heart, but to still the noise so that we can choose rightly. Because in the end, the truest rituals are not found in temples or scriptures. They are found in how we walk, how we speak, how we wait. The sacred is not elsewhere, it is always here, but only the still can see it. Modern life is a paradox of abundance and exhaustion. We have more access than ever: information, connectivity, freedom of choice, yet many feel lost, overwhelmed, untethered. The Stoics would not be surprised, nor would the sages of Moksha, because more options do not create more freedom. They often produce the opposite. It is not excess that liberates, it is clarity. It is knowing what to say no to. Every day we make hundreds of small decisions. What to check first, how to respond to a message, when to pause. These may seem trivial, but from the perspective of conscious living, they are sacred, because each is an opportunity to assert intention over impulse. The Stoics called this the art of assent, synchetathesis, the subtle moment where the mind agrees or refuses to accept an impression as valid. If you see a headline designed to provoke anger, do you accept it as truth or investigate? If someone interrupts you, do you react with irritation or observe the reflex without obeying it? These are micro-meditations. They are not dramatic, but they form the architecture of freedom. In the pursuit of moksha, the practice is similar. Liberation is not a state one enters after years of retreat. It is a choice made moment by moment to stop identifying with the role, the reaction, the narrative. A difficult meeting is no longer a battle for control, but a mirror for equanimity. A canceled plan is no longer an inconvenience, but a lesson in letting go. The person who lives with purpose does not need to control the script, only their presence within it. In the workplace, this might appear as someone calmly refusing an unnecessary meeting. Not out of arrogance, but because their energy is finite and must be directed wisely. In parenting, it may look like a mother who, amidst the cries and chaos, takes a full breath before speaking, not to suppress emotion, but to transform it. In digital life, it might be a person who sets a 1-hour boundary from screens and protects that hour like sacred ground. These are modern rituals, and like ancient ones, they point us inward. To live with inner stillness does not mean being inactive. It means being intentional. The Stoic is not passive. He acts, but never in panic. Never to please. He acts from values, not moods. This is why Marcus Aurelius could manage a crumbling empire while still writing. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The inner fortress does not isolate, it clarifies. From within it, action becomes precise, speech becomes honest, and rest becomes possible. The one seeking moksha also moves through the world, not above it, not against it, but within it, yet untouched by its stickiness. The shopping mall, the traffic jam, the inbox all become part of the training. Nothing is excluded, every setting is valid. For the awakened mind, even discomfort is a form of purification. Not by enduring pain for pain's sake, but by realizing that what disturbs us is often not the thing itself, but our relationship to it. But what does this look like in concrete, daily terms? It may begin with a journal, a page written not to be read by others, but to reflect the truth of the day. 3 questions, perhaps. What did I do today from presence? What did I do from fear? What am I still clinging to? This small practice, done consistently, creates space between stimulus and self. Another application is in conversation. Rather than rushing to speak, we can observe. Am I responding or reacting? Am I speaking from clarity or from the need to be right? The Stoic recommends pausing before speaking. The yogi recommends observing the breath before the word. Both lead to fewer regrets. Even consumption becomes a practice. Before reading the news, we might ask, will this deepen my understanding or inflame my emotions? Before buying something, does this serve my path or distract from it? Before accepting an invitation, am I saying yes out of alignment or out of habit? These questions are not burdens, they are thresholds. They return agency to the moment. In a culture addicted to speed, slowness becomes rebellion. To walk without headphones, to eat without multitasking, to sit without reaching for the phone, these are not luxuries. They are reminders. They say, I am here, I am awake. I do not need to be elsewhere to be free. Technology, of course, is not the enemy. But unconscious use is. Notifications are not chains, but without awareness, we hand them the key. A single practice might be to keep the phone out of reach for the first hour of the day, not to punish the self, but to reclaim attention. In that hour we read, breathe, write, walk without agenda. Not every day will feel magical, but over time that hour becomes the foundation for the others. One of the simplest tools is breath. Accessible anytime, portable, in the middle of traffic, before a presentation, during an argument. The breath, returned to consciously, is a reset button for identity. It reminds us, I am not the emotion. I am the space it moves through. This is the living core of both Stoicism and Moksha. To know that you are not the storm, but the sky. Discipline, in this context, is not force. It is tenderness with structure. It is the strength to protect what matters. A Stoic schedule does not mean rigidity, it means alignment. The same is true for the seeker of liberation. They are not running away from the world. They are learning to move through it without residue. Perhaps the most overlooked practice is rest. Not sleep alone, but true rest. Rest from opinion. Rest from comparison. Rest from performance. The Stoic allows for silence not as avoidance, but as recalibration. The seeker of Moksha sits not to escape, but to see. Stillness is not the opposite of productivity. It is its foundation. And yet, in all this, humility remains essential. To live this way is not to declare oneself enlightened. It is to remain a student. Each day is a test, each moment a teacher. The world does not need more perfect people. It needs more present ones. Ones who can apologize. Ones who can pause. Ones who can change without drama. The result is subtle. No applause, no badge, just a different quality of life. Fewer regrets. Deeper connections. A sense of direction without rigidity. Peace that is not dependent on conditions. This is not utopia. It is practice, and practice is its own reward. In the modern world, moksha does not arrive in a cave. It arrives in the grocery store line, in a traffic jam, in a canceled plan. And Stoicism does not require a robe or ancient text. It requires presence. It asks, can you see clearly now? Can you choose well now? And if not now, when? You don't need to leave your home, your job, your name, or your body to be free. You only need to see clearly what you are not and gently let it go. Liberation is not something loud. It does not shout. It does not arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It slips in like moonlight across a quiet room, soft and certain. One day you realize the weight you've carried was never yours. The opinions, the expectations, the grasping at certainty, and you begin to loosen your grip not out of despair, but out of recognition. You see that what you truly are cannot be improved, only uncovered. Moksha is not a destination. It is a disappearance of noise, of ego, of resistance. And in that absence, presence blooms. Like a flower that only opens when the air is still, your true self emerges when the mind grows quiet. The Stoics knew this in their bones. They taught not how to dominate life, but how to cooperate with it. To live according to nature was not to obey instincts blindly, but to align with the order that runs deeper than emotion, deeper than story. They understood that suffering often arises not from events, but from attachment to how we think life should be. Moksha echoes this. The moment you stop demanding that life be different is the moment you begin to live it fully. And so we return to where we began, not with a new philosophy, but with a renewed attention. What if today, just as it is, contains everything you need to awaken? What if freedom is not around the next corner, but in the breath you're holding right now? You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to perform awakening. You only need to pause, to watch the mind with gentleness, to ask quietly, who is watching? In a world obsessed with productivity, rest becomes resistance. In a culture addicted to novelty, stillness becomes revelation. To live as a Stoic, to walk the path of Moksha, is to embrace the discipline of simplicity, the practice of clarity, not once, but over and over again, each morning, each choice, each moment when you remember who you are beneath the labels. Let the noise pass, let the tide recede. You are not here to win. You are here to wake up. That is the invitation. That is the liberation. And it has been waiting for you all along. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.